Hello, everyone. This is Matt Wilhelm from Invasive Species Action Network in Livingston, Montana, and today we're going to talk about water distribution. Thanks a lot for joining me today. So, the planet Earth, as it looks from outer space, it looks blue. That's why they call it the blue planet sometimes. The reason it looks blue is because 75% of the Earth's surface is covered in water. Only about 2.5% of that is fresh water. So most of the blue that you see on the surface of the earth is salt water, like in oceans. The fresh water that makes up a very small amount, 2.5%. Most of that fresh water is locked up in glaciers or ice, or is underground in what's called groundwater. This fresh water that is locked up in ice and underground is not available to plants or animals for part of the ecosystem or the food web. This picture right here kind of shows us the distribution of water on the surface of the earth. I'm going to use my cursor to kind of guide you along here. I apologize for all the percentages, but bear with me. So oceans, 97%, 97.5% of all of the water on the face of the earth is salt water, as in oceans. And then we drop down here to this part of the chart or the graph. 2.5% is fresh water, but like I said, most of it is in ice caps or glaciers. And then a lot of it is also, about 20% of that is in groundwater, which is underground. So available to animals, humans, plants. We've dropped down to this part right here, about 1%. But a lot of that water is in the soil, and a lot of it is in water vapor. About 52%, about half of the water, and then a small little sliver in rivers, maybe about 1%. So let's just say, for sake of argument, that about half of the water, half of a percent of all of the water on the face of the earth is available to us as fresh surface water in lakes and streams, rivers, creeks, wetlands, springs, things like that. So very limited amount. Keep in mind that this 0.5% that we're talking about down here, we need this for healthy functioning food webs and ecosystems. We need it for industry. Pretty much anything that's manufactured uses fresh water for part of its process. We need it for drinking. We need it for agriculture, to create crops and to water livestock. So it's very important in many, many, many different ways, in a very limited amount. So like I said before, less than 1% of the water on the face of the earth is in fresh surface water. The biosphere is where we all live. The biosphere is defined as the Earth's crust, its waters, the atmosphere where life is supported. So human beings, deer, elk, grasses, turtles, wetlands, and the atmosphere, the clouds above us, that is all within the biosphere, and that is where we live. And less than 1% of all of the Earth's water is in lakes and rivers within that biosphere. So it is a very limited resource. This resource has been the same for millions of years. We've had this amount of water on the face of the earth since the days of the dinosaur. But now, with more and more and more people on the face of our earth, or on the earth's surface, there's more and more need for that 0.5% of water. Drinking water comes from either surface water or groundwater. There's about 150,000 public water systems in the United States. 780 million people, though, around the world do not have access to clean drinking water. Most of our drinking water comes from surface runoff, and that could be rain that falls, precipitates out of clouds, or snow that melts. This melted snow or rain will gather in creeks and rivers, and sometimes the water is piped directly from rivers, like here in Livingston, Montana, or sometimes this water moves down through the watershed to a collection basin, like a lake or a reservoir, where it is pumped out. It's treated to get all of the harmful things out of the water, and then after it's treated, it's piped to your home so you can use it for showers and drinking and cooking and things like that. A lot of us who live rurally or in the country rely on drinking water from groundwater. We drill a well. I'll use my cursor here on the left to show us. So we drill a well to drill through the soil and rock, through the water table into the underground aquifer. I have a piece of property just north of town, and I have a well there, and my well is 280 feet deep. That's where I hit water. Where I grew up in Michigan, our well was only about 30 feet. So how far underground the water is depends a lot on the geology of the area. Also depends on the geography where you live. So 15 million people in the United States rely on private wells to get their water and drinking water from. So watersheds are what collects the water for our drinking, okay? Basically what happens here is, I'm going to use my cursor again. You've got a high point on this side. That's called a watershed divide. And you've got a high point on this side. It's a watershed divide, high altitude. So what happens is when it rains at the top of those watershed divides, gravity will help to pull that water downhill. And as more and more water gathers going downhill, it forms little tiny creeks, and then it turns into a small stream, and then the stream turns into a river, and then a river turns into a bigger river after more tributaries join, and then it goes down into a basin, a lake, or maybe a reservoir. So water can be pumped out for community water systems from the basin or reservoir itself, or the water can be pumped out of the river like we do here in Livingston. Watershed divide, there's a pretty significant watershed divide that goes across the United States from south to north, called the Continental Divide. The Continental Divide goes through the western half of Montana, and the water that falls on the east side of the Continental Divide, most of it goes to the Gulf of Mexico, sorry. Goes to the Gulf of Mexico. A little bit of it goes to Hudson Bay. Water that falls on the west side of the Continental Divide goes to the Pacific Ocean. So let's talk a little bit about ecosystems. Ecosystems are basically defined as all living things, whether they're plants or animals and other organisms, interacting with each other and interacting with their environment. And their environment could be the weather, could be the surface water that we're talking about today, the fresh water or the salt water, within a given area, okay? Now, ecosystems, healthy ecosystems are vital to that 0.5% of clean water. If we have healthy forests, wetlands, and grasslands, those are critical to freshwater, the freshwater global water cycle. All fresh water depends on healthy, functioning ecosystems to keep that water clean, to keep that water pure, to keep that 0.5% healthy for not only human consumption, but for animals, plants, fish, and entire ecosystems. Freshwater ecosystems support about 12% of the animal population and about 40% of the freshwater fish population. So now let's switch gears and talk about blue-green algae, specifically the blooms that are in Lake Erie. Now, the reason we're going to talk about blue-green algae today is that blue-green algae has significant impacts on ecosystems, on food webs, food chains, on the quality of the water, and it has really big impacts on humans that live around those lakes that have blue-green algae. So basically what happens is blue-green algae is a really bad thing, all right? It threatens the drinking water for over 11 million people in the Great Lakes area, especially around Lake Erie. And the reason we have this blue-green algae is that it's fueled by and it grows because of agricultural runoff, fertilizers and manures from huge, giant factory farms. The type of factory, what I mean by a factory farm is, that's the type of farm that has thousands of head of cattle, thousands of pigs, thousands of chickens or turkeys. And so what happens is when you get a bunch of cattle or pigs or chickens or turkeys going to the bathroom a lot, their manure holds a lot of nutrient called phosphorus, and also it holds a lot of nitrate. Fertilizers also hold a lot of phosphorus and nitrate. And what happens is when it rains on that fertilizer and manure, that those nutrients go into the creeks and rivers, the phosphorus and the nitrate. And then that phosphorus and nitrate enriched water flows down stream and eventually dumps into Lake Erie. Phosphorus and nitrate are very good at growing plants. Okay, so when that nutrient-rich water hits Lake Erie, these algae absorb those nutrients and the algae populations explode. All right, and that's why we have these giant algae blooms in Lake Erie, because of all the nutrient runoff from those giant farms. Now, there's a lot of impacts on humans from this blue-green algae. This blue-green algae produces a toxin, and they're called cyanotoxins. They can cause harm to fish. They can cause harm to plants. They can cause harm to any animal that drinks the water. Some of the impacts on animals, we're seeing animal death that come in contact with this water. We've seen death of people's pets. We've seen decreased fish populations and decreased plant populations. But for people, this will give humans a skin irritation, sometimes a rash. Sometimes it'll give you hives or skin blisters. Breathing in the water droplets causes runny eyes, sore throat, asthma-like symptoms, allergic reactions. Drinking this water can cause severe abdominal pain, headache, sore throat, nausea, and vomiting, cough, pneumonia, diarrhea, blistering around the mouth. So it's not very pleasant. So human health. In Toledo, Ohio, they had a really big problem with the blue-green algae in 2014. People were advised not to drink the water, not to bathe in the water, not to wash their hands with the water. So there was basically a warning not to use water at all for human consumption or use. The National Guard came in with bottled water to give to people so they would at least have something to drink. Blue-green effects on wildlife. As I said before, that ingestion by animals can cause vomiting, diarrhea, weakness, and even death. This is a sign that's put up on Lake Erie right here, and it warns that for people to avoid all contact with this water. It says that because of the algae toxins, it's unsafe, and the levels are not safe for people to swim or anything like that. So it's basically this blue-green algae has caused huge impacts on entire food chains and food webs. And remember, we're still talking about that 0.5% of the fresh water on the face of the earth. And the Great Lakes hold a lot of that 0.5% globally. So it's really important to protect that Great Lakes water, and this blue-green algae is definitely having an impact on that limited amount of fresh water that we have. Agriculture relies on clean, healthy water for production of crops, for production of livestock. If we don't have clean, healthy water, we don't have good, healthy food in our grocery stores. Water used for irrigation accounts for nearly 65% of the world's freshwater withdrawals. Industry, pretty much everything that's manufactured uses fresh water in some part of the process. So whether we're talking about a bicycle, a tennis racket, a stapler, an automobile, things in your house like furniture, fresh water is used in the process of making those manufactured products. Recreation is important to a lot of people, both as a way of having fun and also as an economy. About $115 billion is is created through recreational fishing in the United States. Now, keep in mind, we're still talking about that 0.5%. Using that for fishing, about 500,000 jobs are directly attributed to recreation on freshwater as well. Hydropower, that's the creation of electricity through the movement of water past turbines in a hydroelectric plant. And I'll use my cursor here. You can see that this dam is holding back water. And when the water flows through this dam, it turns these turbines. And these turbines create electricity. Now, hydropower is a clean, renewable energy that a lot of people rely on. So looking to the future, populations around the earth are growing. And so will the need for fresh water. That's going to go up. One of the things you can do is you can decrease your water footprint. And we're going to talk about that in a second. You can protect your water. One of the things that on the face of the earth, there's about the same amount of water fresh water on the face of the earth as there was when the dinosaurs were here millions and millions of years ago. So this is a renewable resource, but it's also finite. There's a defined, limited amount of this water. So what we're hoping that people think about when they watch this presentation is how they can protect that 0.5% of water going forward, so there's enough water for us to use for everything that we need in our daily lives. So let's talk about water footprint just a little bit. Water footprint basically means the amount of water consumed or used by a person in their everyday life. Everything that we use or consume has a water footprint, including food, our house, our car, our furniture, our clothes, and on and on and on and on. So understanding water consumption helps us to make smart choices with water use. And part of that is learning your water footprint. Okay, is learning what your water footprint is. There are some things you can do around your house to decrease your water footprint. One thing is you can use less water when you brush your teeth. Turn off the water while you're brushing your teeth. Your parents can install a low flow shower head that conserves water, or a low water use toilet. You can make sure that the dishwasher is completely full of dishes before you run a cycle. So you take shorter showers. There's just a lot of things you can do around the house to help decrease your own personal water footprint. So now it's time for Creativity Corner for fun extensions about learning more about water distribution. Please, we invite you to click on the link below. The staff of Invasive Species Action Network in Livingston, Montana would like to thank you for joining us today. Invasive Species Action Network is concerned with the human-caused spread of invasive species. We ask you that every time when you're finished recreating that you clean, drain, and dry all of your gear every time to stop the human-caused spread of invasive species. To learn more about invasive species, visit www.stopais.org. Also at that website, you'll find other fun and interesting lessons like the ones that you had today. Anyway, thank you very much for joining today, and I hope you have a great day, and we'll see you again next time.